welcome to Innovation Insights. I'm your host, Donny Shimamoto, and I am the inspiration architect for the Center for Accounting Transformation. During these episodes, we'll visit with a variety of people who can share with us ideas, information, technology, and business practices, accelerating innovation and transforming the accounting profession. Today, I'm joined by Adrian Hong, the owner of Hong Consulting. And Adrian, welcome, and tell us a little bit about your background and kind of why you're here today. What are we going to talk about?
For sure. So my background is I started in public accounting as an auditor. And then I spent a couple of years working for the Financial Accounting Standards Board, updating the XBRL taxonomy. And then I actually got to come back home to Hawaii because I was born and raised here and take over the family business, Island Plastic Bags. We're a manufacturer of trash liners, food grade bags, things like that in Halava Valley. Doing that, running that company as president, I learned a lot about sustainability, about environmental legislation, about compliance. And so I started Hong Consulting to help other businesses, like I helped Island Plastic Bags, draft and publish sustainability reports, educate professionals. And that's why I want to, talk with you today and, talk with the people that are listening to this is, this is a really interesting and important and emerging topic in accounting.
I agree with you. That's why we have it in this innovation area, because we feel like this is one of the innovations, ESG reporting, which environmental, social, and governance reporting, for people that don't know that yet. Mm-hmm. This is one of the innovations we're seeing, because everyone criticizes the financial statements and says, well, the financial statements are no longer relevant. Well, actually, I would change that a little bit and say the financial statements are kind of table stakes. And what we're seeing as the new innovation in reporting is really this whole ESG concept. Because if we go back, like integrated reporting was actually around since the 90s, and ESG is sort of the next flavor of really bringing integrated reporting in.
So I would definitely agree with that. So people ask all the time isn't ESG just PR? Like, is it just public relations? Is it the people reporting on environmental, social, and governance issues? Are they just trying to cover their butts to the public? And it can be that, like people can, especially in the United States where it's not a requirement to report these sustainability reports, people can put all kinds of things in them. But if people are taking them seriously, they really provide context for the financial statements, context for the business. It lets people know about things like, the people, like inside the organization, how inclusive and diverse it is, how it views long-term risks, how it, if one day, like they do in Europe, they put a carbon tax in the US, how is that going to affect the business in terms of the liabilities it has, the long-term risks, the assets that might be stranded because of regulation? And so it gives so much context about, things about, potential liabilities that aren't on the balance sheet now, but might be in the future. It gives you a lot of ideas about how like brands, we started a new brand at Island Plastic Bags called Ohanaware, and it's a line of compostable cutlery and Foodland. It's in Tamura's. It's in all these different stores, and we would never have gotten in with plastic cutlery. So much competition. Like we didn't have an established brand before, like that for the plastic cutlery and stuff like that. And so you can create new brands and new business models on this sustainability stuff, and to people that really don't think that it's vital and important and it will have financial impacts. Just look at the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act. There's like hundreds of billions of dollars of money going into new green technologies, whether it's carbon capture, whether it's electrification of vehicles, of the grid. There's not just, like words, like hundreds of billions of dollars in tax credits and grants and funding is going into these areas. And so if you can show brands or technologies or products that service these things, service what the consumer is looking for, service what, the government's trying to incentivize, there's a significant amount of money to be made as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. There's so many interesting aspects to this. Now, earlier you brought up the concept of required, saying it's not required now, so why should someone do it? Well, you just brought up there might be some tax incentives that they can get from that. And Island Plastic Bags is a small company. Can you tell us a little bit more about the company? Because I just want people to get the context of, Island Plastic Bags is not this big public company that's subject to SEC requirements for reporting. So tell us a little bit more about Island Plastic Bags and why did you guys decide to do an ESG report?
Sure. So we're a 12-person company, so definitely not a big company. We have one manufacturing location in Halava Valley in Aiea. And so it's not a big operation at all, but we wanted a contract with a company that was a public company. And as a requirement, they have their vendors get ESG rated because they want that information so that they can report it on their sustainability reports, on their metrics, on their, when they meet with stakeholders, what are they doing to improve their impact on the environment, on good governance, on health and safety for workers. And so to become, to be to get that customer, to get that bid, we had to become ESG rated. Well, you can't get good ESG ratings if you don't have a sustainability report. Our first year's ratings, when we didn't really have a sustainability report, were terrible. And then each year they've improved. Like we use that company uses EcoVadis for their ESG ratings, and it's a very popular way of scorecarding your supply chain. We've gone from unranked to bronze to silver in our respective industry and company size. And so each year we're reporting more relevant information with more context, and we've gotten better and better, and our ratings have increased because of that. But yeah, like we're a small company, but to get that contract, we needed that information to be disclosed. It's also good, like one of the reasons why we did it was to respond to the criticism that, all plastic is evil. We've dealt with a lot of environmentalists at the state legislature, at the city and county of Honolulu and other counties, where that they think that anything plastic or any plastic product or any plastic company is bad. And responding to that criticism, no, a significant portion of our power comes from PV panels on our roof. So, a lot of our, a good chunk of our electricity is generated from non-fossil fuel sources, doesn't emit. Last year, 66% of the plastic bags we sold were made from recycled materials. This is our water usage. This is our health and safety metrics, showing that we're a responsible company, that we care and conserve resources, that we care about the community that we work in. And so, things like that, responding to criticism, trying to get new business. Places like, Tesla, it improves their brand. Like, this is what we're doing to electrify fleets. This is, how we're getting this much emissions off and stuff like that. So like, even for small companies, if you have a product or a technology or a service that's like, especially like, going for these Inflation Reduction Act grants or infrastructure grants and stuff like that, having this reporting information makes you look credible to the government, makes you look credible to the stakeholders and credible to the investors. This information will definitely be asked for, I'm sure, by the government. Like, how do you plan to use this grant? So.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That's where I think a lot of people are looking at it as it's the public company, but really what they should also be looking at is what I often think of as the trickle-down effect. So you've already mentioned the suppliers. We know that from the federal, that's going to end up going to government, to state and local government or municipal governments. And so if anybody is a contractor for them and they're part of that supply chain, now they're going to start getting probably pulled into a lot of these reporting requirements as well. So this is not just a public company thing.
Now, sure. Yeah. To add to that, in the state of Hawaii, I saw one bid that went out that had sustainability linked targets in it. That's just one. They haven't done it for all the state bids, but I mean, eventually, like you said, it's going to trickle down. In time, what I learned was, like, first of all, it was a compliance thing. I did it because a customer asked, but as I kept doing it, it became a great risk assessment process. What's material to us long term? How do we make sure that Island Plastic Bags has been here for 31 years? How do we make sure that it's here for another 30? What are the regulations, cybersecurity issues, water usage issues that are going to affect us? And things popped up that you would never have imagined, like water usage. Like, we don't use a ton of water, but as a manufacturer, we do use more than a condo or a house or things like that. But it became a material ESG issue for us when the Navy fuel spill happened, right? All of a sudden, 20% of the water on Oahu might potentially be contaminated. And so, water supply cut off all those wells around the Navy fuel spill. And, they were talking about a 10% mandatory reduction. So how do you adapt to a world where you don't have enough water to manufacture everything you need? And what plans do you need to put in place? And luckily, people were able to reduce, like the whole island of Oahu was able to reduce their water usage by 5%. Water supply was able to bring on capacity that was offline before on. And so we were able to kind of meet where there was enough demand and supply to meet. But this is still an ongoing Navy fuel. The Navy fuel spill is an ongoing crisis, right? We still have to keep an eye on it. Still have to keep an eye. If water usage increases, there may be mandatory cuts in the future to manufacturers, to food manufacturers, to all types of businesses. So, I'm sure a lot of businesses aren't thinking about that right now, but it's something we're thinking about, and we have plans for. How do we, we probably outsource production if we were forced to reduce production here to our manufacturing partners in different parts of the world to compensate for the things that we couldn't manufacture here because of water scarcity.
Well, I love that you're bringing all this in, because what you're really talking about there is actually business continuity. So it's risk and business continuity. And because I know one of the other questions everyone starts to go to is like, why are we doing this as accountants? Shouldn't all this environmental stuff be done by the scientists? And shouldn't this other manufacturing stuff be done by the engineers? So I think you just helped really make the case that says, this is why us as accountants really need to be involved in this, because in the bottom line, it's about risk management and then business continuity and response to some of these risks that may then arise, which requires our broader view of the business, not just the financial aspects, but looking at operations and everything else that could be going on. What's the alternatives? How can I continue to operate?
So you're absolutely right, 100%. I couldn't agree more in terms of this, accountants measure things. That's what we do. We measure and report, we set goals and stuff like that. So the scientists can give you what the emissions inventory is. When do we get to, 1.5 degrees Celsius for climate change and stuff like that? You can have the engineers let you know how much more efficiency you can get in LED lighting, but there's no context to that information, right? I mean, they can help you reach your goals. They can help you, but there's no one measuring, tracking, and providing context for how that would affect the financials, how that'll affect this community, you're right, we're the central player in all of that, right? And so it's super critical that both within organizations, like CPAs like me, inside of organizations and companies like Island Plastic Bags, but CPAs helping people with client accounting services or audits or tax work. The tax people are going to have to work on these what the grants and the tax credits are going to mean for these organizations. The auditors are going to, in the future, probably going to have to audit some of this information as it becomes more required, especially if this becomes part of SEC reporting. There's a discussion right now about ESG disclosures, basically more environmental disclosures than anything inside of 10Ks. And so if that becomes, there'll definitely be audits of that kind of information. And so accountants have a critical role to play. Public accountants, accountants in organizations, accountants in not-for-profits. This is critical for accountants.
Yeah. And another word that you brought up earlier was materiality. And who else better to assess materiality than us? Tell us how you looked at or how you figured out what aspects of ESG, because if people go and look it up, they'll see it's not just 3 things. It's actually 20, 30, 40 things, depending on which framework you look at. It's a lot of things. So how do you actually figure out what's material or what's important to report on?
The universe of ESG, I call it an umbrella because it's just a huge umbrella of topics. And you could have hundreds of topics, subtopics inside of each E, S, and G. And so it is overwhelming when you first think about it. I would start by looking at what your competitors are reporting, because it can give you help narrow down that universe. What your competitors are reporting, what criticism or interests or concerns you have from stakeholders, whether they're investors, whether they're environmentalists or labor activists, or or the stakeholders in your organization, what do they care about? What are they concerned about? What are your competitors reporting? And then what are risk factors for you? Like what are your long-term risk factors? And that can really help you narrow down ESG. And I found a lot of help looking at competitor, not like direct competitors, because we have, there's not too many public companies that we're going up against, but there are public plastic companies, and taking a look at them and seeing what they're reporting. Seeing what issues in Hawaii are prevalent in terms of like, what specific environmental or social or governance issues are rife here and stuff like that. And so looking at what other people are doing, looking at your risk factors, common ones that probably for everyone, cybersecurity, like huge issue, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, not-for-profits, government. It's never been more critical to have as narrow attack plane as possible and as much defenses as possible. Ransomware, data breaches, they're daily in the news. I was talking with a bunch of Bank of Hawaii loan officers about ESG. I was giving a presentation to them, and I was asking them, how many of you, like of these loan officers, I said, raise your hand if you've never had one of your customers have a breach, and none of them raised their hand. And so this is the scale of the problem, right? So cybersecurity is a huge, governance issue and a social issue, because if those data breaches happen, all that privacy information, all that, personally identifiable information becomes public. So you have a social issue, you have a governance issue, you have huge issues. So that's a big ESG issue. Greenhouse gas emissions, climate change is a huge issue for everybody. What does it look like when your business transitions to a lower carbon world, right? Are assets going to be stranded as we get to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius? What are the risks to your infrastructure, not just your building, but the ports you use, the people in between, the warehouses, the truckers, all of that stuff? What kind of regulation will come into effect? Will it be carrots like we're doing in the US, where there's a lot of tax credits and incentives to move to a lower carbon world? Or is it going to be more like sticks, like in the European Union, like carbon taxes or other things like that? And so, these things are going to affect you. There's going to, like I said, it's a huge umbrella. So there may be tons of topics that will never, like animal welfare is not something that, Center for Accounting Transformation and Enterprise Technologies is ever going to have to worry about. But if you're a farmer, that's a huge ESG issue for you. Like new legislation is coming out in different states about that, methane production from, dairy farms and stuff like that. And so all of these issues are material to somebody, but they may not be material to you. And so looking at different companies and kind of figuring out what your risk factors are really helps.
Yeah. So if I draw the analogy back to what we do in the financial statements, like there's tons of different types of accounts and standards that might or may not apply. It depends. So it comes back down to professional judgment, comes back down to materiality, which you've also mentioned. And then we can also draw that analogy over to the risk management side, which is then understanding where are the risks and how does the risks actually play itself out, because it's more than just financial risks. And enterprise risk management actually falls under our realm as accountants, and especially as CPAs. And a lot of these touch on different types of enterprise risks. And I think a lot of people hear enterprise and think, oh, that's only for big companies. But I think what we're seeing is a really good adaptation of that, or I think of it as a right sizing of enterprise risks as it comes down. Because before too, we used to think, oh, cybersecurity, that was a big company thing. Now, even a sole proprietor needs to really protect customer information, employee information, because the risk is so prevalent everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like, like when people are saying like it's not for small businesses or not for small for profits, some of it may not be, right? You're looking at, like, I look at a sustainability report for Matson or for any of these public companies. Some of these sustainability reports can run over 100 pages. There is no reason a small, like even us, like a 12-person company, should ever have to disclose a 100-page sustainability report, right? I think ours is like our 7 or 8 pages and stuff like that. So, right scale it for you. Like it's cybersecurity. for Target is not going to be applicable to a sole proprietor, but you need some type of cybersecurity. So definitely right size it for you. Take a look at what people are reporting, take a look at what's important to you, and then marshal the resources and the disclosures as necessary for that. Island Plastic Bags looked at, there's a ton of different reporting frameworks. Unfortunately, there's no one FASB framework for sustainability. So there's a lot of different reporting frameworks. And we looked at a bunch of different ones of them. And I kind of mixed and matched for our sustainability report because, I was trying to make a report that was succinct, efficient, useful, and that fit a 12-person company. And so I didn't strictly follow any one of those frameworks, but I used the different frameworks to figure out what was important to report on and disclose and get a better ESG rating and comply with everything, but at still the same time also assess our risks and get utility out of this process. And so I right-sized it for my firm.
I like that. That is definitely the approach I take on a lot of the technology and the transformation work that we do in cybersecurity as well, is really kind of right size that down. And I think that's so key, because a lot of people go, it's just all big stuff. But if you actually take the time, and it's not like it takes a ton of time to just kind of think what is actually relevant and what makes sense. What other, since you've done this, I believe at least 2 years now, what are some of your lessons learned for other small business owners or other accountants that are working with small businesses? What are some of the things where you're like, I wish I knew this when I started?
So one thing, you'll probably start with just having to comply because a customer requested it or things like that. But what you put in is what you get out. So if you put some effort into it, don't make it a PR initiative, actually make it a risk assessment, you can get a lot of value out of that risk assessment. You can figure out where you need to be putting your money, where you need to be moving your organization to over the long term. So that's very helpful. Second, kind of what surprised me too is something you talked about, like trying to marry ESG to financials. Sometimes there isn't a great correlation like between something that you do that really affects the environment and the financials. For example, a lot of companies have air conditioning systems or chillers, or we use refrigeration of some kind, like whether it's supermarkets or whatever, right? So you're using some kind of refrigerant to refrigerate, right? Like a propane tank size of refrigerants costs a few $100s. But if it's emitted, like they call them fugitive emissions because they escape, right? It's not like you're burning something and it comes out. So fugitive emissions, they're just escaping emissions. So let's say, you have refrigerants that escape, like a propane tank full of it. Those emissions, because they have such a bigger global warming potential, they heat the world so much more than carbon dioxide, that you could run a flatbed truck for a whole year, and that would be about the same emissions as a small tank of refrigerant. And so there are some things that you can do, like making sure that your air conditioning systems maintained, repaired, making sure that you reduce leaks inside of your chillers and stuff like that. That can have huge, that don't show up on your financials in terms of like huge negative liabilities, but can have huge environmental impacts. So sometimes you think like, this thing, like when we were going through that process of tracking refrigerant emissions for us, like there's no way that these emissions will be a material part of our process. But you have to do a back of the pencil thing to kind of figure out if that's actually true, right? Which are your assumptions true? And we found out that no, this is material. And if we spend a little bit of money, we can have a huge impact on the way on our greenhouse gas inventory emissions and stuff like that. And so there are ways that you can really help the environment or help your employees or provide better governance that don't cost a lot of money. You can, when you're going through this process, you can kind of see, okay, this would cost me a lot of money to get to that next step. But here I can make a really big impact for my employees, for the health and safety, better lighting, or marking railway handrails and stuff like that. Or, you can figure out what's the most bang for your buck by doing this process.
And so I would draw an analogy again, because as you're saying that, I'm thinking, yeah, and we do the same thing in internal controls, and we look at, I want to design the better control or the better mitigation strategy where I'm going to get the most bang for my buck, and it needs to make sense from a risk reduction versus the cost of actual implementation. And if I take that type of mindset, I can apply the same thing here and really figure out what makes sense. Because it's not about reaching the textbook definition of I've mitigated all my risks. It's figuring out what really makes sense. And especially in our world, the small business world, it's even more important because we don't have those deep pockets that the big companies have.
Yeah, for sure. You need to be able to, like, you need to be able to make money, right? Like, ESG is not a charity. Like, this is not, you're not supposed to, like, live like a monk. Your employees aren't supposed to live like a monk. You want to be profitable. You want to be successful. The whole point is ESG is supposed to help you be successful for the long term, and so you shouldn't be spending all your resources on something that won't give long-term benefit to you and the environment and your employees and your shareholders. And, like, you're supposed to benefit all stakeholders. And not over, and benefit stakeholders over the long term, not just today or not just tomorrow. This is about sustainability, right? You want to have an impact over the long term and stuff like that. So little things today, and imagine just reducing your emissions 2% a year over the long haul, how much you just compound that over time and stuff like that. So small changes over the long haul can have big impacts.
I really like that. That's a great kind of point to close on, per se, because I think that's the other criticism we hear a lot on the public company, is that it's a lot of short term. It's to make that quarterly and all these things. But here's an opportunity where if we take both the bigger picture view as well as the longer term view, or maybe at least the midterm view of what's going on and what changes are we trying to affect, and not just looking at, okay, well, how is this changing our quarter? How is this changing our year? I think that's a great message to kind of end with. And that's why it takes really this balanced view and the judgment of accountants to really get involved with this and help make things happen. So you're actually, because of all these lessons learned, I love too that you have the background with FASB. So you know what the big picture looks like. You know what the big companies look like. You're going to be helping other business owners with this. So if people are interested in learning more, what should they do? How do they get in contact with you?
Awesome. So yeah. With the Center of Accounting for Transformation, we are doing a webinar on island plastic bags as a case study. So when I started this, I basically had to just learn by doing. Like, I just had to figure it out. There weren't a lot of resources for small and mid-sized entities. And so we really want to help out people that want to report their first sustainability report. So we're going to do a case study that kind of walks through how island plastic bags got from not having a report, getting ESG rated, getting a poor ESG rating, to becoming, getting a silver medal from EcoVadis on its ESG rating on the latest one for 2022. And so we want to show you a step by step so you can kind of move in that direction as well. And so there will be a webinar coming out. I believe the details will be attached to this podcast. And if you guys have more topics you guys want us to discuss, please let Donny know. Please let me know. My email address is Adrian Hong, ADRIANHONG @hongconsultingllc.com. But please let me know. Please let Donny know. If you want additional ESG webinars or podcasts or stuff like that, we'd be happy to come back and talk about specific topics. It's such a huge tent of different topics that it would really help if you guys let us know what you want to hear about.
I love that. Thank you for making that call for me. I normally have to ask for that too. And so that's really great. I really thank you, Adrian, for coming and sharing this with me. I think the reason I wanted to talk about this was that I feel like you really made it real, because it's been all this stuff and everyone's talking about as public companies, but to have this small company perspective and the fact that it's doable and it's achievable and it doesn't have to cost you a lot. I think that's another great point that you made there. I think that's really important for everyone to hear. So for all of you out there, I encourage you to come and visit us at the Center for Accounting Transformation website at www.improvetheworld.net. You can see our tie into ESG and sustainability there. So improvetheworld.net. We try to provide business and accounting professionals with frameworks for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply the innovations, and the opportunity to really engage the talent and community people like Adrian who are involved with us to really further your pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. So again, that's www.improvetheworld.net. Thanks again, Adrian, for joining us. And I hope all the rest of you would join us for the next Innovation Insights.